Well, hello again. Welcome again to another episode of Down to Earth but Heavenly Minded. And I'm your host, Risch. And you're listening to the Internet Radio. And we finished up in the last chapter of Daniel and our last episode. But this episode, we're going to tie everything together. We're going to look at the complete prophecy of the book of Daniel. And this might be a little bit longer session, but uh, let's just go ahead and start.
The Book of Daniel, Prophecy in Daniel, by Daniel C. Snaddon. Daniel 3. The two important events are, 1. The making of an image of gold, and, 2. The deliverance of the Hebrew children from the fiery furnace. The building of this image was the king's reaction to the revelation of chapter 2 where he is depicted as the head of gold. Pride. Proverbs 29 verse 23. A man's pride will bring him low, but honor shall uphold the humble in heart. Proverbs 16 verse 18. Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Read verses 1 to 7. The image was 90 feet high and 9 foot broad. When it was built, all the chief men of the kingdom were gathered before it. Then they were instructed that at a given signal they were to fall down and worship it. Those who failed to do so would be cast into a furnace of fire. Read verses 8 to 12. The accusations of the Chaldeans against the three Jews. Their accusations were threefold. 1. They have no regard for the king. 2. They do not serve the king's gods. 3. They do not worship the image. Any one of these accusations, if proven, meant death. Read verses 13 to 18. The Hebrews are brought before the king. Usually men who were accused of such serious matters would have been slain immediately. The king evidently had a high regard for these men and in spite of his anger gave them a second chance. See verse 15. Note the challenge of the king at the end of verse 15. And who is that God, that shall deliver you out of my hands? All this despite what he said in chapter 2:46-47. This describes the arrogance of the king. See Acts 12 verses 20 to 23. Herod eaten with worms. In contrast to the arrogance of the king, note the quiet confidence of the three Hebrews. Verse 16, there is no need for us to answer you in this matter. Verse 17, they state positively that their God is able to deliver them. Verse 18, they also face the alternative that God might not deliver them. They did not doubt God's ability to do this, but allowed for the will and purpose of God. Either way, they affirmed that they would not worship the golden image. See Exodus 20 verses 4 to 6. These men were fully resigned to the will of God. Job 13 to 15, though he slay me yet will I trust him. Read verses 19 to 23. Daniel's companions cast into the furnace. The king is full of fury, heat the furnace 7 times more than usual. These men had really punctured the pride of the king, consequently he lost his temper and judgment. Heating the furnace to 7 times its normal heat would not increase the torment of the offenders. Actually, to have cooled the furnace would have added to their torment. Verse 20, mighty men were assigned to bind these men. Verse 21, they were bound in their clothes. Verse 22, the flames were so hot that the men who bound them were burned. Verse 23, the three were thrown into the furnace. Read verses 24 to 27. The miraculous deliverance from the furnace. Verse 24, the king looked into the furnace and saw a strange sight. 1. Instead of 3 men there were 4. 2. Instead of being bound they were free. 3. Instead of writhing in anguish in the flames, they were walking around making no attempt to escape. 4. The fourth figure was like unto the Son of God. Verse 27. The king realizes that this must be of God working. You servants of the Most High God, come forth. The Hebrew children came forth. There was no question that a mighty miracle had been performed. 1. The hair of the men had not been singed. 2. Their garments had not been damaged with the fire. 3. They did not even have the smell of burning. This is a picture of the deliverance of Israel, particularly at the end of the tribulation, when they will be in fiery affliction. Isaiah 43 verses 1-2. Fear not, for I have redeemed you, I have called you by my name, you are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers they shall not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon you. Verse 28. Nebuchadnezzar's acknowledgement of God. He did this in chapter 2. Verses 29 and 30. The king's decree. The chapter brings to our notice the age-long dilemma of the Christian: obedience to God, or man. The chapter is a thrilling account of 3 young men who remained true to God under severe trial. The chapter also demonstrates God's ability to help His children even in impossible situations. Chapter 3 is the introduction to chapter 4. We see for the last time Daniel's 3 companions. There is no record of their subsequent experiences. Daniel 7. Daniel's first vision, the 4 great beasts. Read verses 1-3. Daniel's dream chronologically occurred between chapter 4 and 5. Daniel had an experience with God which left him considerably shaken. When he regained control of himself, he was so impressed that he wrote it down. This he calls the sum of the matter. Verse 2. In the vision, 4 winds are seen striving on a great sea. Symbolically, the sea represents the mass of humanity or the nations of the world. See Matthew 13 verse 47, the net cast into the sea. Revelation 17 verse 15, the waters which you saw are peoples, multitudes, nations and tongues. Revelation 13 verse 1, the beast rose up out of the sea, etc. The striving of the wind upon the sea is probably symbolic of God's sovereign power in conflict with sinful man. The history of the Gentiles is the record of God striving with the nations and ultimately bringing them into subjection when Christ returns to reign. The first beast, Babylon, compare with chapter 2 head of gold. Read verse 4, a lion with eagle's wings. Lion equals king of beasts, the jungle, strength, power. Eagle's wings equals king of the birds of the air, strength, speed. This describes Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. Daniel saw the wings plucked and the lion made to stand upon his feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. This was Nebuchadnezzar's experience. See chapter 4. His lion-like power was taken from him and he was humbled. Also in chapter 5 the empire which he had established was conquered, defeated. The second beast, Medo-Persia. Breast arms of silver. Read verse 5, a bear, powerful, ferocious, less majestic, less swift, less glorious. It raised itself up on one side. Persia was greater than the Medes. 3 ribs in its mouth, these represent nations which had been subdued, conquered. Devour much flesh, this refers to additional conquests. The third beast, Greece, belly thighs of bronze. Read verse 6, a leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings. This symbol denotes the swiftness of Alexander's conquests, and also the stealth. Describe. After Alexander's death the Grecian kingdom was divided between his 4 generals. The fourth beast, Rome, legs of iron, feet and toes of iron and clay. Read verses 7 and 8. This beast was so terrible that it could not be likened unto any known species. The description given here describes the Roman Empire. Dreadful and terrible, strong exceedingly, great iron teeth, devoured and broke in pieces, stamped the residue with its feet. The Roman generals were ruthless in their conquests. This beast also had 10 horns. Verse 8 As Daniel gazed on this beast he saw another little horn emerging from its head, in the process it uprooted 3 of the first horns. The little horn is then described. It had eyes like a man and a mouth speaking great things. It was a man. This horn has been identified as the Antichrist. Chapter 9:6 The Prince that shall come. 12:11 The Abomination. Revelation 13 verse 1 The beast out of the sea. This one will head the revived Roman Empire. Paul refers to him as the man of sin, 2 Thessalonians 2 verses 4-8. Vision of the Ancient of Days. Verses 9 and 10 These verses are a vision of heaven at the time of the final judgment of the nations. Verses 11 and 12 describes the destruction of the Antichrist and his empire. Verse 13 depicts the coming of the Son of Man. Verse 14 describes the coming in of the 5th kingdom and the everlasting dominion of God. Daniel 9. Daniel's prayer. Daniel's prophecy of the 70 weeks. Let us look at Daniel's prayer. Daniel, the man of prayer. It extends from verses 4 through 19. It is divided into 3 parts. Verse 4 Adoration. Verses 5 to 15 Confession. Verses 16 to 19 The petition. Verse 2 tells us what prompted the prayer. Daniel understood certain prophecies, Jeremiah 25 and 29. Jeremiah under inspiration wrote that the land and the city were to be desolate for 70 years. Then these would be rebuilt. Daniel realized that the time for the fulfillment of this prophecy had almost arrived. He also realized that the people were not ready for the restoration, so he confessed their sin and prayed for them. Notice the pattern of his prayer. Adoration, confession, petition. 1. He gives to God the highest possible place. The great and awesome God. 2. Then he confesses the wickedness of the nation. He says we have sinned, transgressed, committed iniquity, done wickedly, rebelled, forsaken the precepts and ordinances. All Israel has transgressed. Verse 11. Though God had judged them for that sin and though they were suffering for their sin, the captivity, yet they did not pray and confess to God. Verse 13. 3. Having cleared all sin out of the way through confession Daniel presents his petitions. A. He asks God to turn his anger from them. B. He asks that the reproach be taken away from them. C. H. asks that God's presence will fill the sanctuary. D. Then finally Daniel admitted that there was nothing in them to deserve this, but appealed to God's great mercies. Verse 18. The prophecy of the 70 weeks. While Daniel was praying, verse 20 Gabriel the archangel came and touched him. Verse 21. The reason for Gabriel's coming to Daniel was to show him a great prophecy. Verses 22 and 23. The verses 24 to 27 contain the prophecy which has been called the backbone of prophecy. This is entirely Jewish. Verse 24, 70 weeks are determined, cut off or set apart. This could also be interpreted 77s. Week contains 7 years. These are weeks of years, or 490 years equals 7 by 70 years. Verse 24 informs us what will happen at the expiration of these 490 years. His death. 1. Israel's transgressors will be finished. 2. Their sins will be brought to an end. 3. Reconciliation for their iniquity will be made. His reign. 1. Everlasting righteousness will be brought in. 2. All visions and prophecy will be sealed up. 3. The Most Holy will be anointed. Shekinah glory will return to the temple. When was this period of 490 years to begin? Verse 25 From the going out of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem. This commandment was given in 445 B.C. See Nehemiah 2 Artaxerxes. From this time unto Messiah the Prince, was 69 weeks or 483 years. For some reason Gabriel separates the last week of 7 years from the 69 which were to be completed at the coming of the Messiah the Prince. These 69 weeks are divided into 2 periods. 7 weeks or 49 years. 62 weeks or 434 years. During the first 49 years the streets and walls of Jerusalem would be built, the city would be built in troublesome times. The books of Ezra, Nehemiah describe this. Verse 26 And after 62 weeks Messiah shall be cut off, without being recognized. 483 years. Sir Robert Anderson calculates that it was exactly 483 years to the day when Jesus entered Jerusalem as Messiah. Each Gospel writer reports this. Matthew 21. Within a few days of his entry into the city he was crucified. After 62 weeks cut off. The prophecy continues. The people of the prince shall come and destroy the city, etc. fulfilled in A.D. 70. Romans. The future of the Jewish nation foretold war and desolation till the end. Verse 27 There is still another 7 years to be accounted for. The great parenthesis. This final week has been postponed by God and is still future. This period begins with the signing of a treaty between the Antichrist and the Jews. The duration 7 years. Tribulation. After 3.5 years he will break the treaty, will stop all temple worship, will set his own image there and demand obedience and worship. It will remain there until the Lord comes, and the final judgment will be meted out upon the desolator. Daniel 11. The prophecy revealed in this chapter extends from the reign of Darius the Mede, 589 BC, to the last Gentile ruler in the time of the end. Antichrist, man of sin. The chapter divides into 2 main sections. History. 1. Verse 1 to 35 describe the major rulers of the Persian Empire, then the verses which follow describe some of the important events of the empires that followed, concluding with the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes. There is no mention or record of the church age in the chapter. This age chronologically fits in between verse 35 and 36. 2. The second section, verses 36 to 45 deals with the last Gentile ruler who will be in power, tribulation, when Christ returns to the earth. The Antichrist. The first 35 verses cover a period of approximate 200 years. These verses also contain approximate 135 prophetic statements and are all fulfilled without exception. So accurate are these prophecies that the critics have said that they could not possibly have been written before the events. This is the background in which is set the futuristic aspect of Daniel's prophecy concerning the last days. Verse 36 read. The king is the Antichrist, the little horn of Daniel 7, he will be the absolute ruler in the end time. He shall do according to his will. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. The abomination of desolation. Daniel 12 verse 11, Revelation 13. He shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods. On his head are blasphemies. Revelation 13 verse 5, also verse 1. He shall reign until God's purposes are fulfilled. He will be destroyed when the Lord returns to earth. Revelation 17 The religious side destroyed. Revelation 18 The political side destroyed. Verse 37 Neither shall he regard the pagan gods of his fathers, nor regard the desire of women, He is inhuman. Nor regard any god including God. He will be a proud monstrosity. He will not have the affections and emotions of an ordinary man. Verse 38 He will honor the God of war. Revelation 13 verse 7. He will invest the wealth of the world in war. Verse 39 He will divide the land and appoint rulers. These verses give us a complete analysis of the character of this Superman. There is a combination of materialism, militarism, and religion. This man will force his worship on all men. He is Satan's masterpiece, Satan's substitute for Jesus Christ. Therefore properly identified as the Antichrist. Verse 40 Read the first phrase of this verse. The breaking up of world rule by the Antichrist. This describes the invasion of the kings of the north and south against Israel and also against its protector. The battle that takes place is described in Ezekiel 38 verses 18 to 22. The result is about 5/6 of the invading forces are slain. This apparently is done by God. Ezekiel 39 verse 2. 7 months to bury the dead. Ezekiel 39 verse 12. The counter-attack. Last phrase verse 40. He shall enter into the countries. Verses 41 to 43 The invasion of the Middle East countries by the Western forces under the Antichrist. Roman victory is not complete. Moab, Edom, Ammon escape. Verse 44 After the Antichrist has established himself in Palestine, news from the north and east will trouble him. Verse 45 Red between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. The world kingdom or empire is continuing to break up. This is made the more sinister by the drying up of the Euphrates. Revelation 16 verse 12. 200 million men advance from the Far East. Revelation 9. Before the East and West fight, a sign appears in heaven. The sin of the Son of Man Matthew 24 verse 30. This sign causes them to turn from their hostility toward each other, and to unite to fight the Lord. Psalm 2. The result of this battle is found in Zechariah 12 verses 1 and 3, 5, Zechariah 14 verses 12 to 13. Supper of the Great God, Revelation 19 verse 17. He shall come to his end. At the return of Christ to the earth. Revelation 19 verses 17 to 21.
The end.